Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about sexual objectification. Okay, I think this is a very important topic, and I think it's very related to narcissism. Okay, but I also think it's a very misunderstood topic, and I'm just going to give my opinion. Okay, um, basically, the problem I see with sexual objectification, okay, it's essentially the feeling that people have that they are not seen for all of their qualities, but they're only seen for, let's say, their sexual attractiveness, or they're seen as a sexual object and not as a person. Okay. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, this is directly related to narcissism. Okay. Even if it is subclinical narcissism. All right. Whenever you look at a person and you only see pieces of the person, okay, I think that comes from the same neurological process, the same psychology that actually produces narcissism. Okay, so in other words, as applied to my own self, okay, if I tend to filter out information, so I'm only processing information that reinforces my idea that I'm important, or that I'm more important than other people, or that other people are relatively unimportant, if that's how I'm filtering information, that is essentially essentially it's breaking up who I am, and I'm only seeing myself through a certain angle. Okay, in other words, I'm not getting the full filtration of information as to who I really am in relation to other people. So I'm actually not seeing my whole self. Okay, I'm only seeing like a cartoon version of myself. You know what I mean? Like a almost like a caricature of my own self. Okay, so in a sense, when people are narcissistic with regard to themselves, they actually are destroying the totality of their own essence, because they're only seeing themselves as kind of like a stylized caricature and not as the full person that they are. So in a sense, when narcissists see themselves as being, like, say, superior and special, and other people as being relatively less important, they're actually doing abuse to themselves, because they're not seeing themselves as they really are. Okay, they're just seeing sort of a cartoon caricature instead of the person that they are. Okay, so basically the same thing kind of happens when a person is so flooded by the stimulation of being attracted by somebody else, okay, to the point that they no longer see the person, but they just see the object of attraction. All right. It's the same kind of filtration going on, where you're not taking in the full information. You're not able to process the full information about another person. And you're only filtering and sort of being flooded by certain aspects of that person, where you start to see them as though they were like an idol, or like a caricature, basically. um, you are sort of reducing the fullness of their humanity, just like we do it to ourselves when we only see ourselves as like a caricature and not as the fullness of what we really are, the good and the bad, right? The good and the bad. And so obviously there's something narcissistic going on, but at the same time, I think we don't want to forget that to some extent, this narcissistic filtration is probably very common among people. Okay, you don't have to have the full blown disorder to have, let's say, being over flooded. Let's say being over flooded with how stimulated you are about how wonderful a person looks or how attractive they are, at least in the most extreme cases, and how that can kind of distort and sort of interfere with getting a full picture of a person. We all struggle with that, right? So I think, and also too, like, let's not forget that there may be some religious psychology going on, that maybe as humans, maybe we are programmed to be a little bit narcissistic, in the sense that maybe we are, as humans, we are programmed occasionally to make an idol out of somebody, to make a god out of somebody, like, say, a famous actress, or a celebrity, or somebody who's really attractive. Maybe it is part of our psychology as religious beings. It's part of our religious psychology. When something is extraordinarily attractive or extraordinarily impressive, that we may sort of get so flooded with our adoration of how wonderful a person is, or whatever, that we start to see them as an idol and not as a person. Okay, that may be just part of our psychology, and we can't beat ourselves up over that. That just may be how we're programmed, and we may have to take a moment to sort of put it into perspective and remind ourselves that's a person, and sort of recover our overall sense of that person. And maybe on the rare occasion that we have the privilege of actually getting to know somebody who is, let's say, really famous or really special, truly special, not narcissistic, but truly special. And then over time, you realize they're just a person, and they have their flaws, and they have their, imperfections, and they're just a regular person, right? But not all of us have that opportunity. And so a lot of us just don't get a lot of practice with getting, say, overwhelmed with how attractive a person is, and then kind of going through the procedure of sort of recovering a sense of that person, reminding ourselves that's just a regular person and just getting to know them as a person. So I think what we're really struggling with, in a way, is maybe some religious part of our psychology that wants to make an idol, that wants to make a god, that wants to make, a celebrity out of people, and we do it to ourselves and we do it to other people. And it's just, maybe it's an extra procedure, maybe it's extra bandwidth, it's extra processing resources in the brain, where we can sort of recognize that we do have this sort of religious tendency, and then maybe just the extra time and effort to just kind of bring it down to earth and put perspective into it, right? But obviously, people who have true personality disorder or are on the spectrum of having a real problem with their personality, it may be very difficult to get those resources together and to sort of develop perspective while we're being stimulated, right? So some people may have for some people, it may be almost impossible to recover perspective when we are at the same time stimulated, okay? And I think that this kind of religious adoration is a stimulation, and unfortunately, it's a struggle for all of us, right? But the question is, what is the problem I see with we're developing, I think, almost like a fetish about, the problem of sexual objectification, because I think it's getting to the point where I sometimes wonder if there's a narcissistic aspect to people who complain of being sexually objectified. And the reason I say this, first of all, I think there may be a misunderstanding of why people get so turned off by sexual objectification as opposed to being flattered by it, right? And I think we need to look at that first, okay? Why is it that we're so offended by sexual objectification? I think if we answer that question, I think we'll unpack how maybe there's a misunderstanding about what's really happening, okay? And we may even find the narcissism in people who feel objectified, right? Let's just take a look. I mean, if I'm wrong, I just want to explore it. But first of all, when I hear people complaining about being sexually objectified, okay, what I hear is a frustration at not being appreciated for all of the other things about me that are not attracting attention. Okay, so I hear people saying, gosh, I guess it's okay that he thinks I'm good looking, but this guy doesn't appreciate that I also am a very smart person, doesn't appreciate that I'm also a very thoughtful person, I'm a good person. They're not seeing me, and being frustrated about that, right? And I think that is, unfortunately, a little bit narcissistic, okay, in the sense that I think we should all strive to be satisfied and to find comfort in our qualities without necessarily other people appreciating them, okay? It depends on the situation. Like, there are situations where it may be that for employment purposes or maybe for career, it could be actually harmful if people don't appreciate our qualities. But I think instead of complaining about it, I think we have to also remember that, it is part of human nature for people to be overwhelmed by certain attractiveness and certain stimulation and maybe have difficulty recovering their ability to appreciate everything. And it may just be part of the human condition, part of the human challenge, that people are not always going to see us in our fullness, and people will always tend to have a little bit of a stereotypical or kind of a caricature vision of everybody. That we may tend in just the course of life to sort of simplify our sense of people to some extent, and that just may be part of the efficiency of our psychology, that we like to kind of simplify people around, our notion of their stereotype identity. We sort of stereotype people. All of us do that. And so instead of maybe being so frustrated over this, maybe a better philosophy, a better strategy would be to accept, all of us, that people tend to stereotype, right? And that instead of looking at that as an injustice, to look at it as that's one of the shortcomings of human nature, that people tend to stereotype and people tend to get overstimulated by things that are really shiny. And some of us who are, I'm not attractive, but those of us who are attractive, it just comes with the territory. You're a shiny object. You have to sort of get over it. And in the sense that instead of expecting people to have advanced psychology to get over it, maybe if somebody is attractive, okay, maybe to take it on themselves to find a clever and a not confrontational way, a productive and nice way of sort of being patient and accepting that people will tend to have a stereotypical view, of them. But at the same time, maybe patiently just kind of, not in a confrontational way, but just trying slowly to sort of overcome that, not by dismissing how attractive they are, which I think is an unfortunate maneuver that a lot of people do, where they dismiss their own attractiveness as a way of sort of trying to say, hey, this is what I really am. And I think it would actually be more advanced if people would say, yes, I am attractive, but there's also more to me, and to sort of slowly show people and try to show them, the other things without trying to diminish the attractiveness. I think that's unfortunate, because I don't think we want to make a taboo out of sexual power. I think that actually complicates the problem. Okay. I think that complicates the problem. Right. And I see this a lot with like the incel people. I see how that's so complicated, because the incel people have developed this fantasy that we all have sort of equal sexual, how would you say? They imagine a kind of an equality in the sexual economy that may not actually be true. Okay. In other words, if we were more open about our sexual powers, let's say, or our attractiveness powers, right? Yeah, I think it would become more evident that we are not all equal in an attractiveness or sexual power. Okay. So there are tremendous inequalities. All right. And if that were more obvious and more open, if we were more open about that, I think people would be less frustrated when let's say they don't have a high standing in the sexual economy, okay, because it'll become more open and less of a taboo that yes, there are tremendous inequalities, okay. And so when people start to accept the inequalities, right, instead of people disavowing their sexual powers, actually owning their sexual powers, okay, I think those of us who have less sexual power or less attractiveness power or less standing in the sexual economy, I think we'll come to sort of sadly sort of accept it, okay, as opposed to holding on to these fantasies that we somehow could participate maybe more than what we're actually able to, And so the worst thing that people can do is disavow or minimize their own sexual powers, okay. I think paradoxically, the best way to deal with this is for people to fully own whatever sexual powers or lack of power they have, okay, to fully own it. And just like it takes a certain amount of courage for an attractive person to own their power and to have the courage not to overestimate it, but just admit it as it is, without underestimating it. That takes a lot of courage. I think it's the same, it's kind of like the same vibration, sort of the same sort of headspace that will help people who have less power also have the courage to admit their lack of power, okay, and where everybody comes out, okay. But when people start concealing their own sexual power and sort of minimizing it, that will also cause people who have less power to conceal and minimize and not be aware of how relatively little power they have. And then you're preventing those people from coming to terms with their lesser power, okay? And so in a more open world, okay, the more that people who have power, the more that people who have attractiveness and who have high standing in this sexual economy, the more they're open about it, all right? Without being rude, without putting people down, just being open, I think that will allow people who have lesser power, people who tend to idolize, let's say, attractive people, to also come out and say, yes, they have so much power, and it's kind of the same truth. It's the same light of truth. That same light of truth will help people who have lesser power say, yeah, it's pretty obvious I don't have that power, And that's really the honest place that we're all skipping around because everybody wants to kind of put a taboo on that. It's sort of an unspoken thing. And so I think in a sense, I think it's almost healthier for people to be more open about their sexual standing, and not to be concealing. Okay. I think this modesty maneuver actually hurts everybody. Okay. And it complicates the problem because the same light of truth that is open about people's power is the same light of truth where, let's say in my case, I'm not an incel, but I'll try to relate to the incels. Okay. Where I could say, yeah, I don't have that level of power. I have a lesser power. I am in the same light of truth. I have the courage to say that I have very low standing in this sexual economy and to sort of own it, you know? And at the same time, once you own it, then you can say, but gosh, now I see in my psychology how I idolize these people, because I am maybe of a lower standing. And there may be something about the sexual economy and also our religious psychology, where if we're relatively low in standing compared to people who have very high standing, okay, which is an honest thing that can really happen. Some of us who have a relatively low standing, we will tend to idolize the people that have a relatively high standing. And we can maybe, through the courage of realizing this is a byproduct of my relative standing, okay, and this is really just the religious part of me operating, okay, through the light of that awareness, I think that can kind of bring down the power a little bit and sort of, take away that feeling of being overwhelmed, because at least you have understanding. It may hurt because it involves a lot of highly charged emotions. Okay. So it may be very painful and frustrating, but at least through the power of bringing things out to the light of day where things are very open, I think people can start to have the courage to actually face these feelings from understanding, as opposed to just being a participant without understanding, right? Where you're just sort of a victim of the dynamics without the light of understanding. So I really think that instead of being, disturbed by the fact that people have human, like say religious psychology, okay, and let's say if I'm an attractive woman, let's say I get tired of people just seeing me as attractive and not seeing other parts of me. And instead of having that resentment, it might be better just to come out and be not proud, but just to come out and be open that obviously I have this power, and obviously this power causes people to react a certain way. Okay. And to accept that people are that way, to accept that this is just the relative, I don't know, the dynamics of religious psychology, and that I become sort of a religious object to these people for better or for worse, and that it's probably better paradoxically for me to fully accept it and not be afraid or resentful of it. And that will create an atmosphere where the people who are, let's say, acting badly, who are, let's say, objectifying me, whatever, that those people in that same light of awareness, they can sort of come to realize their relative position, which sadly may be relatively low, and hopefully they can just go through the pain and the struggle that we all go through. And it can be a shared struggle for everybody, where the result of the struggle is that everybody becomes more mature and has at least more awareness around these things. It doesn't mean we're not going to take away the relative inequalities. The inequalities are just part of that's just part of reality, And so, and now I realize this can be very challenging. And I don't even know what to say about incels. I think we need to understand the incel psychology better. I think we need to have more appreciation that when you have a relatively low standing in any economic situation, okay, you are going to tend to idolize people, okay? And you're also going to tend, like any religious person, to think that you can have communion with the object of your adoration, right? Just like the Christians, they have communion with Jesus. They actually, they eat the host and they drink the wine, the body and the blood. And there's this idea that the adoration involves like taking in and communing with, And so I think it can be very painful to realize that when you make an idol out of somebody, okay, that you maybe in your imagination, you're going to be inclined to have communion with that person. Okay. But in reality, it may be frustrating to realize that, if you take away that religious psychology, that we're just dealing with different people and that those people actually have normal rights and dignities just like other people do. Okay. And it may be hard to wear two hats and to have the religious experience with a person as an idol, but also to realize they're a person, and you need to kind of you have to sort of like be able to be in two places and also be able to remember that, this is reality, and these are just people. So I think that obviously it'll take a lot of frustration. And I think the worst thing to tell an incel might be to say, hey, you may be one of those few people where you're so low in the sexual economy that there's really no good solution for you in the sexual economy. In other words, if I could find a person, a female, that's on the same level as you are, okay, you probably wouldn't even see them as a woman. You probably would, because you're so used to idolizing women, right? The incels are so used to idolizing women that when they see women that aren't in the idol category, they might just say, hey, I'm not even interested, and you have to deal with that. In other words, maybe one of the tough gut punches, like we all have to take gut punches in life, maybe one of the tough gut punches for a person who's a true incel is that maybe in all reality, the women who might be at their same level in terms of sexual, their standing in the sexual economy, that they might not be interested in those people. And so what that effectively means is that maybe they don't really have a lot of possibilities in the sexual economy. That's not where they're going to do very well in life. Okay. And the question is, can you take the gut punch and get over thinking that it's an injustice, and maybe remind yourself that there's other aspects of life where maybe you can compensate in a healthy way, right? That you're not going to make it in the sexual economy, or you may make it, but maybe it's not going to be wise to have any expectations in that economy, right? Just because if your standing is so low, even though there may be potentially some opportunity, it's better not to invest expectations, just because there's also a possibility that maybe it won't turn out very well. Okay. And so the idea is that, just like a grieving process, if you have the courage to take it in, the reality of that, and to understand that, I may have to give up my expectations in that particular economy. And can I take the gut punch and process the grief and the reality, but know that at least I'm being courageous, and the price I'm paying, let's say, for taking in the pain, the pain of knowing that I'm not going to get certain things in life, I'm gaining something else compensatorily, and knowing that I'm taking on more reality. Okay. And then I'm actually, in a way, I'm developing, kind of developing a strength, in the sense that I'm taking, when we take on a lot of pain and we actually process it with courage, that actually gives us another kind of strength. Okay. In some other sense, right? So that there is something gained, through the pain. It's not just pain for the sake of pain, but it actually develops us, and it kind of weathers us to be more of like, say, a veteran of life, and that when you really suffer pain and you really live with it, you sort of earn veteran credentials, and that you're sort of a veteran of life, and it is a step ahead, and it is a development. So if there's a way you can see it like that, there could be, I don't know, how would you say, you could come to terms with it, just like a person comes to term with having, let's say, a terminal illness or a disability or something, But I think it would help in that process if we're going to enjoy the light of that kind of courage. Okay, it would help for people who have attractiveness not to minimize their attractiveness because they're frustrated at how people are objectifying them. I think healthier would be to say, okay, that's the religious psychology. I'm an idol to certain people. Okay, and yes, it's frustrating because I also want to be seen as a person, but I am going to come out in the light of reality, in the light of truth. And I'm going to accept that I have power in this economy. It doesn't mean I have power in other areas, but I have power here, obviously. And just to be more open about it, because I think when people are more open about their power, that at least provides the space for other people maybe to become more open about their relative lack of power, and to process all the feelings that go with that. And not to encourage in the culture, not to encourage in the culture people, let's say, developing false expectations under maybe like an ideology that people don't really have different powers. Okay, there may be a lot of ideology that doesn't approve of disequalities, right? And so we have to maybe have the courage to appreciate that, on some level, the ideology makes sense because, let's say, in the eyes of the law, or let's say in the eyes of, say that in the eyes of the law or in the eyes of the Constitution, maybe people should be treated as equal for the purposes of the law. Yes. And that's a good ideology, but not to assume that that means that we're equal in everything. Okay. And also to come to terms, all of us, those of us who have more, those of us who have less, to come to terms with what is it's not really an injustice. Certain inequalities are just actually justice because it's the justice of truth. That some of us really are not powerful in certain economies, and some of us really do have low standing in certain economies, and just to take it in and to process it and then move on to be strong where we can be in other areas, wherever we can. So basically, I'm not a big fan of this thing of complaining about being sexually objectified. I think it would probably be more courageous, I think, for people to say, yeah, I'm sexually powerful and this is the consequence, this is the side effect, that people are going to see me as an object, but not to take that as like a stimulation to like, not to take that as a trigger for me to suppress and maybe diminish, or how would you say, kind of downplay my power. If people do have power, sexual power, attractiveness power, not to pretend to have more than what you have. That's also very delicate. Some people are just a little bit attractive, and then they think they're a 10 out of 10, and really they're just a 7.5. I think it takes a lot of maturity to say, yeah, I'm attractive, but I don't know how much, but I obviously have some power, but just to be open about it. And I think that openness can help other people who have relatively less power. And so I think that's a better approach. And I think it would move us away from resenting what in the end is just our religious psychology. We don't want to become people that hate humans for being human, And one of the most important characteristics of being human is our like religious psychology. It's just part of us. Of course we can get over it, but you can't get over it without first accepting it, And so I think that's just important. And the other thing too is you don't want to resent people for being inferior. I don't think that's a good policy. If somebody's inferior, that's why they're objectifying you. And so it's better to say, well, hey, I'm superior to that person. That's why they're objectifying me. But I don't want to like resent somebody for being lesser than me. So I think psychologically we have to come to terms with, if you're being objectified, it's because in some ways that person is actually lesser. And to have maybe a little more grace about it, be a little more gracious about it. And also, obviously protect yourself too. I mean, a situation where there's abuse going on, obviously, and life is dangerous. And, part of the danger of being attractive is that you're going to attract, potential danger. So, it is delicate, but I think people who are attractive, obviously take measures to protect yourself, but I don't think you want to downplay your actual standing in the world, because I don't know. I think there's something very wrong. I think the more we downplay the powers that we have, I think the more we allow a dark space for people who have lesser powers not to fully process their relative lack of standing. And if a person doesn't process their relative lack of standing, that will also cause them to maybe step out of place in the world. And in the end, I think it's better just to be more open about our relative inequalities, So that's pretty much my understanding and my point of view on objectification. I think it's misunderstood. I think in the end, it's not really objectification. What it really is, and what's really going on with narcissism, is it's fragmentation. It's fragmentation because we get over flooded by certain shiny aspects of reality, right? And I think that's part of our religious psychology. And I think if we could just maybe be more open about it and not be so resentful of it, I think that will at least provide the light of awareness to help people work on it, because we all struggle with that, So anyway, yeah, I personally think, that all the powers that we have, whether it's attractiveness, sexuality, whether it's charisma, they're all to be celebrated and at least appreciated, There's no power, there's no single power that's the be all and end all, right? They're just powers, but I think we should celebrate them, not overestimate them, but just celebrate them, but definitely be open about them, because otherwise what we're going to do is we're going to make it hard for people who are, let's say, weaker or inferior. We're going to make it harder for those people and to come to terms and to have maybe a better overall dynamic between everybody. So anyway, I'm sure I wasn't very eloquent in this video, but that's what I have to offer on sexual objectification. So thanks for watching.